Hi, my name is Pilo Bueno. My parents were Arturo and Georgia Bueno. I was born in 1960 in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was the youngest of 8 kids and came from a very traditional, very Catholic family, but I didn't really feel like I fit in. I really didn't know what my gender was initially. I sort of thought that as we aged, we would sort of decide what we wanted to be, but I didn't grow up with the thought that I was male. And that information was basically something that the world gave me. It wasn't a choice. You know, I grew up in the barrio and there was a lot of very rough boys, and I was just definitely not that. I knew I was gay. But what I didn't know is what the church's stance on homosexuality was. And that made a big difference because the church basically ran our lives. It was later in life that I learned that homosexuality was in fact a sin. It was essentially listening to Billy Graham one night. Billy Graham made it very, very clear that the very worst thing a person could be or do was be a homosexual. And I have to admit, I did plummet into a pretty deep depression. And I knew I couldn't change that about myself, at least not alone. I began to pray, and I prayed every night for many, many years. And I cried myself to sleep every night for many, many years in the hope that I would one day wake up and be straight. After high school, I remember starting to plan to go to college. And then that summer when I came back, I started a relationship with a man in Santa Fe who was going to St. John's College. And I remember coming out to my family. Funny way to come out. My mother was trying to find out for me whether my sister was a lesbian. And so my mom keeps interrogating me. And finally I said, you know, if you want to know about her sexual orientation, you need to ask her directly. But if you're interested in finding out about my sexual orientation, I'm happy to tell you. And my mother just froze. And we were at her house having lunch. She stood up from the table and she looked at me. You mean to tell me you're gay? And I said, yes, I'm gay. And she stood up from the table and she turned her back to the table. There was silence, which seemed to last for hours, was probably just a minute. And then she turned around and she grabbed a plate off the table and she slammed it on the table and shards went flying everywhere. And then she said, I can't even look at you. And she turned around again. More silence. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, now what? And then she turned back and she said, I disown you. So I just sat there. And my response to her was, I'm not your property. You've never owned me. When a parent says to you that they disown you, it really does have a pretty profound impact. And I remember leaving my mother's place really very shaken by that event. And communication basically stopped there. I decided I needed a big change. And so my partner, Ben, and I decided to go to Europe to study art in Aix-en-Provence. As the date was getting closer to leave for Europe, I decided to call my mom and tell her that I was going to be leaving the country. And then she said, well, will you come to dinner before you leave? And you can bring your friend. It was sort of a tense dinner for me in a way, but it broke the ice. And even though I could sort of feel like people looking and maybe whispering or that sort of thing, I was there, and I was there with my partner, and my parents knew that I was there with my partner. It's not like instantly it was easy and, you know, we got along and, you know, she was supportive of my sexual orientation. She knew that she needed to make amends. And so that was sort of the beginning of the healing process.